So, Alan Snelling, composer, producer, recording engineer, mostly in like the film, TV world.
Yep.
Also, you've done ADR, Foley, etc.
Yep.
You used to be the assistant engineer for the legendary Eric Tomlinson, and you and Eric were fundamental in introducing Abbey Road to the wonderful world of film scoring, and that's still a very important part of the work we do here to this day. So, firstly, welcome.
Thank you.
I can't wait to hear about your time here at Abbey Road. But first off, I'd just like to get a sense of, how were you introduced into the world of film sound, if you like?
Okay, so I left school pre-university. I wanted to get out and earn some money. I went into the BBC actually for the first year as an office assistant, and writing radio logs for local radio for people's PRS actually, because I thought it was mildly something to do with music.
Okay, what's a radio log?
Radio log is like, it's just a piece of paper with questions on, and you have to fill it in.
Okay.
How long was the piece played for? Was it needle time?
Got it.
Was it a tape?
Right.
It was royalty collection data
okay.
in the earliest form.
Yeah.
So that was my first job, thinking that I could get into a music studio. So a music studio, a recording was where I wanted to be. I was very excited as a child with a family member who worked for a company called Truvox, I think, and he had a reel-to-reel tape recorder in the 60s, which was, the big spools. And when I sang into it, I got echo. That was it. I was off. So it was going to be a recording studio. But the thing with the BBC was I think you had to be like 21 to get into the radio side, and I was 17 or 18.
Okay.
And I thought, I'm not waiting that long. So I was writing off to various studios and stuff, and I lived in Middlesex, West London, and near to me was a company called Anvil in a place called Denham in Buckinghamshire, and I wrote to them, and I got a job with them.
Wow, so Denham, that used to be, that was a film stage, right, or a film studio that was, 1935, I think, opened?
Yeah.
I think they actually stopped doing film there in the mid-50s.
Indeed. So it was all owned by or managed, Alexander Korda basically controlled it all.
Yeah.
And that was built in the 30s. Lots of major British films were made there on the film backlot, on the big stages.
Yeah.
And so it was a classic, it was like a small Pinewood, really.
Yeah.
And so come mid-50s, early 50s, that all closed, and it became an admin block for Rank Xerox.
Okay.
Being part of the Rank organisation at that point then. So basically, come the 60s, it was storage places for copy machines.
Okay.
Now, Anvil was a private company that originally came from Beaconsfield and was housed in what is now the film school at Beaconsfield.
Oh, okay.
They got out of that building in 1966 and moved into space within the old Denham studio block in 1966. And within that block, they had a film dubbing stage, they had a music stage, various other small studios for post and editing rooms. And of course, in those days, we were all on tape, we were all on magnetic, we were all on film.
Yep.
And they started scoring, quite big films in the 60s there. But they needed an engineer with a name.
Yep.
So the boss guy, Ken Cameron, who basically was a co-owner of the studio, he recorded music with Muir Matheson in the old film composition days. I mean, Muir was doing a lot of compositions in the 40s and 50s and stuff. That era was sort of changing. Anyway, they got Eric Tomlinson in, who was at that time, he came from CTS at Bayswater.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He took the head engineer job there and developed it how he wanted it and started getting his own clients and everything and built it up. Got new equipment. They put a new Neve desk in, I think, in 1968. And we had film projection. It was a slightly smaller room than Studio One, but we could get a 70, maybe 80-piece orchestra in there at a push.
Yeah.
And it slightly deader sounds, but it worked well for a lot of things. And
Yeah, I read
You know.
somewhere that at the time it was considered like probably the most technically advanced music or sound, I should say,
Yeah.
sound recording for
Yeah.
film in the whole of Europe. It was
Anvil
like,
had a great name, you know. I mean, it was doing well with the music. It had a lot of ADR, what we call post-sync facility as well, and you know, dubbing and everything. And it was a really swinging
Okay,
place in the
okay.
'60s and stuff,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
'70s. But you know, things change, and my first sort of year at Anvil, I couldn't get in with Eric because there just actually wasn't a place to get, you know, for me to go in there. So I went in as a projectionist.
Okay.
So I used to run the film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that taught me the backroom stuff, how it all worked, why it was working. And then when there was availability, I joined Eric round about 1975.
So as projectionist, do you mean a projectionist for the scoring sessions, as it were? Or was it a different thing you were doing?
I went from, they had a projection room in every studio.
Right, okay.
So there was a 35mm projection room for the music stage. So I worked on that sometimes.
Okay.
Or I was in the back room on the projectors for dubbing.
Got it. Okay.
Or post-sync.
Yeah.
And, you know, we had like 7 projectionists, so we just sort of took it in turns what to do.
Yeah.
But that gave me a really, really good education
Yeah.
in the back room. And some funny stories.
I'm sure.
But after a year, you know, I got in as Eric's assistant, basically, which
Okay.
was fantastic. And him and I actually got off really well on a good footing. We were, how old was he? He was probably it was about 25 years difference between us, 26 probably. And we had the same sense of humour. And he taught me a load of stuff, but he said, look, I can't teach you everything. Come in at the weekend or downtime, bring a band in,
Yeah.
do it.
Good way to learn, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
just get your hands dirty.
So suddenly, you know, I was in a band and we had a Neve console, a Studer 24 track.
And 35mm projection. Every band needs that. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't quite use that bit, but you know, it was like all-nighters learning stuff. And Eric was also really busy. You know, he was under the cosh. He was doing really big stuff, and he wanted someone to help him and do other sessions as well. But in the early days, you know, I was his assistant for many years, as well as being a recording engineer, gradually coming up through the ranks and doing my own stuff.
Got it. Okay.
But those early sessions, I mean, Star Wars was probably the big one.
Yeah.
The first big one.
Before we go into that,
Yeah.
so can you remember your first film scoring gig, as it were, as Eric's assistant?
I went in one Sunday and there was a musical being made about Cinderella called The Slipper and the Rose.
Okay.
And it had all been shot at Pinewood, directed by Brian Forbes.
Okay.
And there was an afternoon session, and they were overdubbing some singers.
Yeah.
Angela Morley was the musical director and composer on that. And suddenly I was in the control room with Brian Forbes, and there was a lot of people there, and it was serious stuff. You know?
Yeah.
And I was basically, working the tape machine, setting the studio,
Yeah.
and that sort of stuff, making tea,
Yeah.
and soaking it all up.
Yeah.
So that was really the first thing, and then we were doing others. A lot of Americans would come over to England to record film scores and everything, because it's funny. America didn't. Los Angeles at the time didn't really have that good a facility of film scoring stages.
That's
in the
interesting.
70s. No.
Wow. Okay.
No. They learnt a lot from stuff that we did later on. I mean, like Skywalker really was built upon sort of coming here and having a look, and going there and having a look, and then they looked at it and then built it. So
Wow, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So I remember reading about like George Martin when he was working here in the in the 50s. He would go over to the States and see what the studios were doing there, because it's like, how are they getting these sounds and all that sort of stuff? It almost sounds like a reverse thing.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there was that, and also I think the the currency thing was in favour to come over as well, and they could bring their families and stuff, and so they used to stay for a couple of weeks and everything. And it was quite favourable. Or not, but there was something to do with that.
A few different reasons. It sounded like it was quite a tight sort of unit, as it were? Was it like literally you and Eric doing everything for these sessions? Because now, obviously, you'd have second assistants, runners, people helping you set up, but it sounded like you were kind of doing a lot of roles at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Anvil was a small company, and there were other people there. There was technical. Ken Somerville was a director of the company and did a lot technically, and he'd help out with some back room stuff and everything. But fundamentally, if a session came in, I'd set the studio up and make the tea, get the tapes rolling, and do the drop-ins.
Yeah.
And Eric would just walk in with his pipe and annoy everybody and get a great sound. Hey,
what
you got it.
He got a great sound. Yeah, no doubt about that. So out on the floor then, out in the recording area, what was a typical setup then for you guys back then? I mean, now it's like 80 odd mics and all that. I mean, was it similar? Like, was it a lot going on? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we had we didn't really have the Decca Tree in the 70s really, but we used to have 3 Omni Sherps microphones, one over the conductor's head, and then left and right. Left and right of him.
So kind of tree-like,
tree-ish.
Okay. Yeah, tree-ish. Okay.
Tree-ish, and then we'd have spot sectional microphones all over the orchestra. So on like 12 violins, you'd have 287s or something. And then 287s on the second violins, and then I mean, we'd end up filling the desk up, which was 24 inputs only in those days.
Yeah.
And we had to remember that,
Yeah.
Sometimes the old parallel cable would come out, and we'd have to parallel some microphones together. But never anything too close. I mean, you're looking at fairly ambient stuff, just so that when we recorded multi-track. But in the mix, you could just get the presence through. There was quite, it's surprising what you could have done on a mix and everything. I mean, you can still hear the brass on the violin mics, and why not? Because, and if you can't, then you're not going to get the sound. So like brass was, trumpets, trombones, tuba, 4 on the woodwind, half a dozen on the percussion, 2 on the French horns. Very similar to what you're doing in there. I mean, but I know these days now people are trying out different ambient mic techniques to sort of go more multi-channel. And I mean, later on, I was doing 2 sort of like I was doing like a Decca Tree and 2 outer left and rights as well, which I thought was quite an interesting sound.
That's still pretty common to this day. I think outriggers, as it were.
Out mics.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the 3 Sherps. Were they like MK5s? I think
so.
Yeah, because Simon Rhodes, who's one of the recording engineers here, when he found out I was interviewing him, he goes, "Can you ask Alan?"
Oh dear.
Can you ask Alan? He just wanted to know whether Eric was using Omnis or cardioids for his main. Okay, Omnis.
They were. As far as I know, they were Omnis. I think they were switchable to cardioids, but they were basically Omnis. And we got to know about Sherps microphones through a music editor called Lenny Engel, and he came over. He used to be Jerry Goldsmith's music editor in the early days. And Lenny was like a real sort of recording freak. Back in his home in LA, he had looked like a car garage, but open up the door, it was a recording studio.
Nice, I like his style.
Yeah, as you do. And he brought these over to try out, and I mean, Jerry loved them, and so we bought 3, and that was it. So, but we used mainly 87s, 84s, KM84s, KM84s. We had some 67s. We had half a dozen Telefunken 251s, 250s, which I think Leicester may have got hold of 2 of them. I'm not quite sure.
I've never seen one at Abbey Road, unfortunately.
Right. Then it was very mysterious where they went.
I'll give Leicester a call after this. about those 251s.
Sitting there with a 251 out of his pocket. But they were the main mics. We used to have like RCA bomb mics, they used to call them.
The skunk.
Yeah, for the French horns.
Oh, God, I love that microphone. We've got one here at Abbey Road. I used it on every single session. It's got such a great sound to it. It's a pokey little thing.
Yes, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
If you look at the trailer for Citizen Smith,
right?
Sorry, Citizen Kane, I should say, on YouTube or whatever, like that microphone features in probably 70% of the trailer.
Oh, really?
Because of the narrator, the mic comes down.
Oh gosh, right.
And Orson Welles is narrating this trailer, and the mic's just there. It's like, there's the skunk. But, great mic.
And I'm sure we're talking about the same thing, but they used to sit, behind and everything, and behind the horns and stuff.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the studio layout was basically the same for most sessions. I mean, we used to have so trailing behind the conductor. Sometimes the percussion would be behind the conductor.
Oh, really?
Which would be in front of the control room, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, if it was a less orchestral type sort of score with more detail, like cartoon music or something fiddly, then the conductor would really want to sort of see what the percussion guys are up to. all the time, Other than that, it would be more conventional where the percussion would sit right at the back under the screen.
Yeah.
Anything like harps or keyboards would be sort of on this side, going back this side on the conductor. We had a slight dead area there as well. So, we had a couple of grand pianos, Celeste, and then the harpist used to sit there as well.
Wow.
So,
I mean, I've never heard of percussion behind the conductor before. I mean, what would that do to the soundstage? Can you remember?
It was okay. We put some screens up, if we put some screens up between the conductor and the percussion to keep the percussion off the strings.
Yeah.
But those sort of sessions were much more less sort of orchestral ensemble. It was more multi-track recording.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So you needed to dig in on stuff and whatever.
And I imagine it was very much tutti, as it were, like the whole orchestra all playing at the same time.
Yeah,
there was no layering as such back then.
Everything was live, bang, straight in, out again. And like, okay, so on the first Star Wars and many films around that era in the 70s, Eric would record a live 3-track mix, left, centre, right, straight out.
Wow.
And that's what Star Wars was recorded on.
So I guess that's the mixture of the 3 main mics and then a little bit poke from the spot mics maybe?
Yeah. So we had all the faders up, all routed out to 1, 2 and 3, or 1 and then to, whatever, and the overheads, but they were all also subgrouped to multis on the multi-track as well, which you weren't hearing.
Yeah, okay.
We were just making sure that the meters were working and it was
Yeah.
going. So, but the first Star Wars, I know for a fact, was recorded on that was the 3-track mix.
Amazing. That's what ended up in the final mix.
Yeah, and we were shooting on that particular set. We only had a 16-track studio in those days, so we had 3 tracks as the main, plus multis, and out the back we had the old RCA 35mm magnetic recorders.
Okay.
We had both of those going, one as a backup, and they were picking up the 3-track sound as well.
Okay.
And basically, that's the mag that got sent to the dub.
Okay, interesting. So you would essentially say you weren't doing a live mix, or even if you are doing a live mix, that whatever the mix is, you would actually mix onto magnetic, and that would be sent off to the dub.
Yeah,
wow.
that was it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like no messing about,
So interesting. So you were obviously scoring. Was it 35mm you were scoring to?
Yeah.
Was there always picture? Was that common?
Yeah, mainly, 90%, 99% picture.
Yeah.
People used to come in with a dupe with streamers everywhere and punch marks on it and stuff. And there'd always be a music editor, but not many people in the control room. And I look at sessions now and I'm going, where, these people, I mean, great.
Who is everyone? What's going on? Yeah.
But, it was confined to, me and Eric. There was a lovely tea lady that came in and served tea, Mary, who was a big star at Anvil at Denham. She'd been there since year 1.
Yeah.
And she just served teas for everyone. And, all the big composers, all the clients used to come back and the first thing they'd say was, "Where's Mary?"
Yeah. Nice.
Unbelievable.
Love it. Yeah.
So that's the sort of atmosphere it was creating. It got, And Eric was really good with people, he made everyone feel at home. It was like a little family, you walked into, really.
Yeah, because I get the impression a lot of the composers that you guys worked with, they would be regulars, right? The likes of John Williams or Jerry Goldsmith, they would do most of their films there if they could. Was that the way it was?
At that time, yeah. I mean, they mainly, yes. I mean, I think when we keep using Star Wars as a reference, but it was a big turning point in film score, in film sound as well.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people were coming to Anvil at Denham because of the success of Star Wars.
Yes.
and that was good for us.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So yeah, that was really, really good. And there were other composers. There was, I mean,
Was it Alex North? I think
Alex
he was
North.
regular, wasn't he?
he came in and out a bit. He came here on a couple of sessions. He was doing some stuff here.
The Dragon Slayer, was it?
Dragon
Yeah.
Slayer, that went on for quite a long time. Yeah, and
One of those sessions. Okay.
yeah, and I remember he was quite old and he couldn't talk very loud. He had to have a microphone with a PA system
Oh wow. Okay.
going around the room so
Yeah.
everyone could hear what he was talking about.
Yeah,
you
it was
know.
quite important that everyone understood what he was wanting to do.
Absolutely,
I suppose. Yeah.
absolutely. Lionel Newman, who was then in 76, 77 head of 20th Century Fox Music,
Oh, okay.
would be the score reader for John Williams
Wow.
on the Star
Okay.
Wars sessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Lionel Newman himself was a composer and a conductor,
Mm-hmm.
and a fantastic conductor. And when he was up there on the podium, it was pretty serious. you know.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And of course, Lionel Newman had a brother called Alfred Newman who wrote the 20th Century Fox logo.
Yes. That's a name that definitely rings a bell.
Yeah.
It's quite a famous piece of music. Yeah.
And the Newman family are quite sort of famous.
Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
Randy, who's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
nephew, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Speaking of famous logos and whatnot, so yeah, Star Wars.
oh, right.
How was that for you?
that small
So,
film.
I don't know. Where do we begin? I mean, obviously, it's such a massively iconic score.
Yeah.
Obviously, massively iconic film. I mean, did you get a sense of how crazily big this thing was going to
Okay.
become when you started working on it, or was it just like, oh, another job? Or
Well, okay, I'll tell you the story that I've told sometimes to other people, but my recollection of it was I was fairly new. I'd been in the studio 6 months, setting up and stuff, and me and Eric were really a good unit, you know. And he said, we've got an interesting guy coming in next week. He said, a guy called John Williams. He said, I've worked with him before. And he said, he's really good. I said, oh, that's nice.
Yep, excellent. Good bit of info.
Yeah. So the lineup came in. It was like a 75, 80 piece orchestra, you know, fairly conventional setup and everything. It was an evening session. I remember it so well. And the entourage came in. There was George Lucas, Gary Kurtz, music editor, Kenny Womberg, various wives, you know, all that sort of the usual sort of lot that come in.
Yeah.
And we were off to a rolling start, and the film starts rolling. And the first half of the session was almost like didn't really know what it was all about. There were just small cues, you know. And we went, oh, that's nice, good, yeah, John's good, he's all right, you know. And then I saw in the tea break the copyist putting out Star Wars main title. And I remember this in my mind. It went out on all the parts, right? And they came back after a tea break. That was a change. It changed the world.
Blew you all away.
He played it with. He went through it once, and we had the film running, and the film was black and white dupe, but they had the writing that all the, going on and on and on, and the spaceship. They'd got all that going on it.
So you're picking up a vibe in the room, I guess. Yeah.
And and they're doing this cue, and it's like Eric's going, when's it going to end? When's it going to end? He said, this spaceship goes on forever, this is unreal.
Yeah.
And, the main title of Star Wars, that was it, bang. I think he probably played it another twice, recorded it twice on tape, and that was it. And we all just went, my God.
Wow. This is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic,
So how many days did you guys do on that film? Can you remember? I mean, was it like a week or something, or was it really short and sweet? Or
I've got the diaries at home. I should have brought them.
No, that's all right. I mean,
I've got the diaries of the sessions. I think we did probably 8 sessions or something.
Okay.
I don't know, 8 3-hour sessions over a period of 2 weeks or something, or maybe shorter.
Oh, wow, okay.
But, the thing with Star Wars was, I mean, it wasn't a known thing that it was going to sell. I mean, they had no money, hardly. They were filming it on a budget at Elstree. And John got put up for the job. And I think John was looking for something new because he'd done Towering Inferno.
Yep.
And he'd done Jaws. And I think he was looking for something a little bit more different. But I think the word was this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And John got onto it,
Yeah.
And so yeah, and that's what it was. I mean,
Yeah.
they made, so much money on the first one, and great. I mean, it changed. There were suddenly queues of people, round the block at cinemas watching films suddenly.
Yeah,
You know.
changed everything, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like, it sounds like it was a bit of a risk for certain people involved.
I think
I guess
so.
John as well took a bit of a punt on it, maybe.
I
And
think so. Yeah, but
no one really knew, did
but
they?
what a piece of music to write.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was just, I mean, it was just fantastic, and the orchestra played well, and you had Maurice Murphy then on the
Yes,
trumpet and stuff. and
amazing.
They played, and it was just fabulous. And of course, there's some cues that are more, quite murky and under dialogue. Well, there's a thing with John Williams. Not only being a brilliant composer, but he can write busy stuff under dialogue, and it doesn't get in the way.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
incredible.
Every director's dream, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're all talking away, and the orchestra's it's doing all the busy stuff, but it's going with the emotion of the
Yeah.
dialogue, which is so what it should be.
Interesting. And I guess the other really interesting thing about that score, and I get what you can tell me, was it recorded at Anvil, was the bar scene. I remember.
Yeah,
that was
right.
like everything is very orchestral, and then there's that, and it's like, whoa, this is different.
Yeah, that was a Saturday afternoon session, 1 3-hour session, and we came in, and Eric gave me the lineup. I said, "What's this?" He said, he said, "Well, it's drums, it's bass, it's a synth." Synth guy came in with a Moog, and it was just really weird, a clarinet or something, and it was really funky, And suddenly John was off the podium, and he was just sort of, in the dead area of the studio, and we were doing this really weird music,
Yeah.
And it was weird. It was quite
Oh
outrageous.
yeah,
really.
there's still nothing quite like it.
Nothing
It
quite
still sounds like this incredible oddity. It's brilliant.
It
Yeah.
was just so cool, and so that was another really interesting, part of the session.
Yeah.
And of course, then we went on to do the second Star Wars just prior to the Anvil at Denham closing.
Yeah, that would have been one of the last films done there then? Like, was that 1980?
Yeah, 1980. We did, we did Lion of the Desert with Maurice Jarre.
Yes.
And that was really coming up to the May-June
The kick-out date.
kick-out date. So we also did another film around about that time with Howard Blake, actually, called, it was about Titanic, and that was quite a big film. That was before he'd sort of really got big, because he later went on and composed The Snowman, which was great. And
So I'm really fascinated, actually. So between the first Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, did you notice a difference in dynamics or budget or the way things were done? Or because I remember I worked on the Lord of the Rings films, 3 of them, and I remember there was definitely a shift between first film, massive success.
Yeah.
Okay, you can do what you want now, pretty much.
God,
and
yeah.
there was definitely a different dynamic. Did you experience that between the first Star Wars and the second?
yeah, I mean, it was pretty much the same team that came back on the second one. In fact, exactly the same. But, there was suddenly a lunch laid on.
Okay, that was the main difference.
Hey,
Better lunch.
Yeah, and all organic. you
Yeah,
know. But it was, it was a different. It didn't affect how we worked. We just got on with it. We were.
Yeah.
I think we were all so excited to have them back and listen to the wonderful music again.
Yeah.
What it did bring on a bit was a few more hangers-on.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a few more people in the control room, which, in hindsight, probably shouldn't have been. Because John's trying to work.
Yeah.
And all that sort of
Got
stuff.
it, yeah,
But in the meantime, in between those two films, he'd scored with us Superman 1.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
In
Another
July.
iconic score. You know.
For me, one of my favourite scores, really. I mean, we had 32 recording sessions for that.
Wow. That even today, that's a lot.
Yeah, over a period of probably 6 weeks or something, 7 weeks.
Wow.
And the first time I heard the Superman theme and stuff, it was just that was really good. And I was working much closer with John Williams on that session, because although Eric recorded it, I got the job of editing all the takes.
Oh, okay.
At the end of it. So we'd record, and then the next day or the next batch of days after the sessions, John would come in, he'd listen to all the playback. It'd just be me and him all day, 6 hours, 7 hours sitting there. and he'd sketch mark all the scores, and I'd cut straight through the 2-inch tape.
Yeah.
No master, no backup. Oh, it was a master, no backup.
Yeah.
No backup.
I mean, it sounds terrifying. No undo button. Yeah.
No undo button. I must have been mad. But I didn't know any different. You know, that was my university.
Yeah.
It was like there was and he knew we were doing good edits, and he used to push me. He used to say, "Can we just get in on that? You know, that quaver note on the woodwind? Can we take it from bar? You know,
Yeah.
And I mean it. You know, it went wrong a few times, but basically you got it. So
What an amazing learning curve, I suppose, when you got someone like that amazing at what they do, pushing your limits.
Yeah,
as
we
well,
were.
Right?
I mean, when you're with a guy like that,
Yeah.
you just go up. You just reach for the stars.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it just pushes your game up.
Yes.
And that's what I found really exciting. And there was a lot of respect in the control room. We didn't natter too much, you know, but there was a classic story where the main title for Superman 1, he came in on an evening session with the London Symphony Orchestra, and they'd been really working hard all day, so they were a bit tired. And, you know, Superman 1 main titles is not an easy piece.
Okay. Yeah.
He made him record it 8 times, 8 pieces.
Okay.
Right? The next day, John and I sat down and he did a sketch map for it all, and we stuck it all together. And I was pretty good, you know. I had a goodie reel and an outtake reel, and everything was marked and everything. And in those days, we drank a lot of coffee. He had a cigar. I was smoking. Ash went in the bin. You know, it was a bit sort of. It wasn't as sort of pristine as it is now.
Yeah.
That was our working day, and there was something like 63 edits in a 6-minute piece of music.
Wow.
And I played it all back to him at 6 o'clock, and he went, "Yeah, that's great." He said, "We've got a better opening on take 6." He said, and I had another take in there for the da da. I won't sing it because of copyright, but you know, the opening bars of Superman.
Yeah.
And I said, "Okay, yeah, fine." And I had lost this piece of tape. I couldn't find it anywhere.
This take 6.
Take 6.
Yeah.
And there it was, hanging out of the waste paper bin under bottles of beer, coffee, ash, everything. And I ripped it out, and I went, I think this is it. Put it in. Bang. I said, "Try this, John." "That's great," he said. And that's what the world heard.
I love it.
been in
Once
a
you
bin.
wipe the beer off it, it sounded fine.
They'd been in a bin for 8 hours. But that was a nice little story.
I remember you telling me about, I think this is correct, how you and Jerry Goldsmith found yourself in Anvil trying to find a sound that represents the alien.
Oh, yes.
Which I thought that was quite an interesting story. I mean, because that again feels to me like a massive iconic film that was scored by you and Eric. You know, it's
Yeah, that was a special one as well. So all these were coming in a row. There was Star Wars, Superman, Aliens.
What a run.
I mean, it was all like stuff like that. So about 3 months before, I think the actual, or maybe 2 months before he'd started writing the score for Alien, he was on board and was seeking some sort of sound design musical thing to represent sort of space, really, and some sort of weirdness, an alien thing. And of course, you know, there wasn't any computers going on in those days, and I was sort of doing stuff with backward tapes and doing, you know, experimenting with the gear I had. But we ended up recording hits on the piano, playing it backwards. We threw golf balls into the piano.
Don't do that at home.
You know, slowing down, lots of footsteps and stuff, banging things in the studio. And we spent like a good 2 days, I think it was. And then what happened on day 2, there'd been a previous session in, and I think it was F&H Percussion, who was sort of the big hire percussion company at the time, had left these canvas roller things they used in theatre to sound like the wind.
Yeah.
And they were being used on a session, so they sort of went like this, you know. But Jerry went over to it and he started rolling. He said, record this. So we recorded endless amounts of that.
Okay.
And they used that basically. If you hear a lot of stuff in Alienware hasn't got much going on, you hear this sort of
yes.
like drone.
So
thing,
in all that 2 days of work, it ended up in the final film. You got it there in the end.
absolutely,
Nice, love it.
Yeah, but he was. In many ways, you know, I was quite young, you see, so I was like really into sort of experimental and getting into electronics a bit, and I was getting into that. And Eric didn't really want to know about that, but Jerry was, you know, Jerry was quite old, in fact, for getting into electronics, and of course he proved he did. You know, he was writing lots of stuff on keyboards, and with sequencers and stuff like that. And so we connected in many ways on that level.
Got it.
And that was really cool. I mean, probably jumping ahead a bit, but I remember here he did a film score called Outland.
Outland, yeah, that's a cool film actually. I like that. Yeah.
And Eric recorded it, but Jerry and I spent a whole day down in Studio 3.
Yeah.
And a guy came in with a Fairlight. This is 1981.
So probably an early example of a Fairlight.
So we had the Fairlight, and I had a CP something, the drum box,
Like the Akai.
You know, like Phil Collins uses the CP. The Yamaha. Is it Yamaha?
Yeah, I think it was a Yamaha drum machine.
Roland
drum machine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was fiddling around with that, and we were getting this thing going, and he'd written this thing in 7/8, and the Fairlight was doing a sequence, and I just started up this drum machine in 4/4, and it's just a weird...
Just one of those magic moments.
Yeah, it's like that weird music that was on Star Wars in the bar, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a track on the Outland album where, I don't know what it's called, but it's some background music, but it's really weird. And we both love doing that sort of stuff. You know?
Yeah, amazing. I'll have to fish it out, because I went to go and see that in the cinema fairly recently-ish on an old 70mm print.
Oh, really?
It was cool to see it. I mean, you can see the influence from the likes of Alien and whatnot in that film. It's got a certain look to it. I don't know. I think it's very cool. Well, okay, so that's Abbey Road, right? So what? So
Anvil, yeah.
The transition from Anvil to Abbey Road. How? What? When? Why?
Okay, so we were trundling on quite well, getting a lot of work at Anvil Denham because of the strength of these very successful films, and suddenly, like, sometime in 1979, because we rented the place, the landlord wanted to pull the whole site down and rebuild it all. So I think they gave us like 6 months' notice or 8 months' notice. So basically, we were looking for somewhere different.
Yeah.
And so everything bar me and Eric, where we worked, that part of Anvil went up the road to another block and got a home up there. And we were still looking for a studio. So Eric knew a lot of places, and he was talking to people and everything. And of course, the management at Anvil were quite concerned that, you know, we were like not out of a job and we could still do the film music, because, you know, we had a lot of clients and everything. So there was... I mean, Eric knew of Abbey Road. He knew Ken Townsend.
He was the manager at the time, of Abbey Road.
Yeah,
wasn't
Ken
he?
Townsend was a manager here. And Abbey Road at the time was owned by EMI, and head guy Andrew Mitchell at Elstree, I do believe. And our chief executive officer at Anvil, a guy called Richard Warren, knew Andrew Mitchell.
Okay.
So there was talk.
Yeah,
suddenly. There was a bit of talking going on.
Yeah.
And really, Eric sort of said, well, you know, it'd be great to come to Abbey Road, and, you know, started the ball rolling. That really whetted the appetite of Ken, I think, who was desperate here to try and fill an empty Studio One at the time.
Studio One was struggling at the time, I heard. I even heard they had plans to cut it up and divide it into smaller pop studios, which, if that had happened, we wouldn't be sat here now. No. The way I read it, as it were, you know, you and Eric came along and kind of saved Abbey Road's arse a little bit, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
in terms of Studio One, certainly.
We were going to be shut down. We needed to, we needed a home, and it was through Richard Warren at Anvil, Andrew Mitchell at EMI, Ken Townsend here, and Eric. You know, Eric was very excited about coming here, and I think it whet the appetites of the other three.
Right.
And so there was some sort of deal drawn up to sort of put it together, you know.
Anvil Abbey Road Screen Sound, I think it was called.
Yes, that's
right?
what it was called.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I imagine that that wasn't probably the easiest of transitions
Uh,
in terms of, because obviously Anvil was set up for film scoring, whereas Abbey Road wasn't.
Yeah, I think we were trying to please all members really and make
Yeah.
it a new company. So it was a bit of the old, it was a bit of the new,
Mm-hmm.
and it ended up being a completely brand new company. And Ken Townsend, myself, and Eric, and another financial guy were basically the 4 directors of the company, based here. It was administered by Anvil at Denham still in the initial years, and the basic deal was that we would come in here, equip. In terms of the film equipment, what was needed, we literally put 2 holes in the wall at Studio One. You can still see at the top.
Still there.
For two projectors to go through, and put an electronic screen down at the end.
That's still there.
Yeah, that's still there, as we discussed earlier. And, started rolling, really. And we had some synchronization gear for the tape machines. And the amp room were like, this is all new to them.
Yes,
So they were putting
the
all
tech guys, right?
guys,
It would have been
Yeah.
new territory, I suppose. Yeah,
absolutely. And it was quite crude, actually, when you look back on it, but it all worked.
Yep.
And that's how it started. And I think in those days, it's like £100 an hour for Studio One. We got £40 out of it, and Abbey Road earned 60.
Okay.
And for that, Colette, for the £60 that we gave or you earned, we got a room, telephones free, and Colette, who was a wonderful bookings manager,
legendary studio manager. Yeah, absolutely.
And so she was great because she had to learn all our clients suddenly, and get into the film world and understand, people and film people would book. I want 2 weeks, first 2 weeks of July or something, and then 3 days before cancel it.
Yeah,
and this was a problem because it never happened before.
I'd heard this. It was, I think, Colette's World was a bit of a nightmare for a while, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think the original reason that Studio One was in trouble and not being used because it was predominantly EMI Classics home.
Yes.
And they pretty much recorded all the repertoire, right? And there wasn't much new repertoire coming through, and that whole CD thing hadn't happened by that stage.
Absolutely.
You guys come along, start filling it with film projects, and then CD comes along, digital.
Yeah.
EMI Classics come back, knocking on the door going, why is our studio not available?
Yeah.
And hence Colette was kind of in the middle of Film World,
it was
EMI
hard.
Classics, and apparently it was just like a bit of a nightmare, right?
Yeah, that was like good three years in, really. Once the CD came out, we were like in around about 83, 84, it started to really clash.
Okay, so you had a couple of years of
we had
glory
free rein,
years,
yes.
as it were.
yes. We could do what we
Then
want.
bloody CD came along. Yeah.
But then the shit hit the fan really a bit.
Okay. Wow.
But initially, we were just sort of booking load of stuff, and also there was at the time of us opening, which was August the 4th, 1980. There you go.
There we go.
There's a date.
It's a date we remember.
There was a strike on in Los Angeles, musician strike or some strike, and so a lot of people were coming over here anyway.
Okay. So it worked in your favour.
Yeah, productions that wouldn't normally come out of the US.
Right.
And so suddenly we were getting a lot of pickup work.
Okay.
And it certainly put, Eric at Abbey Road doing film work here on the map.
Okay, amazing. And can you remember the first score you did here at Abbey Road?
It was something to do with Sophia Loren, and it was Howard Blake again. Howard Blake was the MD. I'm pretty certain that was one of the first sessions.
Okay, yeah.
It was sort of the life of Sophia Loren or something. I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so I was looking at the old notes, and the first film that comes up is a film called Eye of the Needle. It was directed by the guy who actually went on to direct Return of the Jedi, which is also done in the studio. Richard Moore, I can't remember his second name.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, that was the first record I could find of any film being done here. But for all I know, the Sophie Loren film records for whatever got taken out of that box, and you know how you just miss bits of history quite easily.
I'm pretty certain it was the Howard Blake one, and then I think Eye of the Needle was like within days of it or something like that. So, yeah. But it was all strange and new because everything was so different. Like the control room was really weird because it wasn't, it was like a cupboard really.
Yeah, and facing the wrong way.
Facing the wrong way, looked like a toilet. Excuse my language, but I mean that was what we had. But outside you had this wonderful, wonderful room, and. But I was thinking about this actually coming in, and looking back on the day and trying to be in it again. It all could have gone horribly wrong because Abbey Road didn't know much about the film stuff. We were like new guys on the block in a strange place. The control room was not a big selling point. But what was a selling point was the sound of the studio, the expertise and the love of the close people associated in getting this thing off the ground was paramount. Paramount.
Yeah.
I mean, Ken Townsend was absolutely, over the moon that all this was happening, with fingers crossed behind him. But always met the clients, always was happy with it all. And he was a very personable guy.
Yes.
Colette did a great job and always did.
Yep.
And of course, Eric was Eric all the time and people loved him. And that was it. And it's about personalities at the end of the day, making something work.
Yeah.
And we had a good team. Technically, we were all in the same boat, scratching our heads sometimes, what we're going to do. But it worked really well. And the team back at Denham, although they weren't here every day, they provided a lot of technical support.
Oh, okay.
In the initial sort of wiring stuff up and bits and pieces, because it was alien equipment to a lot of people here.
Okay.
And so we had a lot of love and support from a lot of people, and I think that was terribly important.
Yeah. You picked up on the acoustics of Studio One, because that feels to me like that was a major difference, right? Because I think Anvil was a bit drier, right?
Yes,
like completely different acoustics.
Yeah.
So can you remember that juxtaposition of Anvil to Abbey Run and Anvil to Abbey Road and how that made you feel, or did you notice it immediately? Like, oh my God, this is so different.
We knew it was different, but it was like, wow,
Okay.
It's like suddenly three-dimensional.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could give you a problem.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
it was too live sometimes.
Yeah,
It was great for big orchestral ensemble stuff. But if you put anything with a rhythmic nature in there and wanted a deader sound, you were in trouble. But don't go to that room, This was the thing. But in terms of, let's stay with orchestra a minute.
Yep.
Yes, it was great. It was, you had to sort of, the first 15 minutes of it, just listen to what was going on in that room before you could, really make any adjustments, if you had to make any adjustments,
Yeah. It's interesting. If you go onto like Spotify, you can just press start on A New Hope, press start on Empire Strikes Back, and then press start on Return of the Jedi. And to my ears, you definitely hear that difference between the first two and the third one. That opening, like it's just like there's a different vibe
depth
going on, and depth. Yeah,
that's it. That's the other thing I think I felt, and you've picked up on that. It's a depth. It's a three-dimensional feel that you get in that room that one didn't get in smaller rooms.
Yeah.
And you have to learn how that feels and how to cope with it. Yeah. And once you've got it, which doesn't take long, you know how to work with it, But I've done rhythm sections in there, without,
Very brave.
forget all your new booths and everything. It was like,
Well, I remember you saying earlier on how Anvil had like a drier section.
Yes.
Like there was no option like that in Studio One. It was just like, it was all or nothing, I suppose.
But we had a roaming couple of booths on wheels.
Oh God, I remember those. I think they were still here when I first started.
Ugly looking things.
Yeah.
You could sort of get away with it, but
Okay.
Yeah. But then you wouldn't do that for particularly an orchestral score so much. And these were, and as the 80s progressed, people would come in with, and you'd overdub to a synth track or something, or a sequence or something.
Yeah.
But I recorded First Blood in there. With
I was going to mention First Blood, an amazing score. No, I'd love to hear about it, because was that your transition from assisting Eric to becoming like scoring engineer?
I'd been scoring for like 3 or 4 years before that.
Oh, okay.
So, but that was one of the bigger ones I did, and terrific score, as you say.
That's amazing. Love it.
Just amazing.
Great film as well.
And Jerry came in, and he had a phase of not wanting to go multi-track.
Okay.
And he said, I want to do it on 3-track. That's it. That's all you're getting.
Like
not
the
even
old Eric way, I suppose.
Yeah, but not even on a multi-track where you could record the separate tracks.
Okay.
There's no multi-track of First Blood. It's just on a 3-track half-inch tape.
Okay, so you went along with the request.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
amazing.
So, and I had a 2-track running backup, and he said, just I want it really ambient and stuff. Anyway, I put 16 mics out probably on the orchestra, but you can tell it's quite ambient. Some of the detail does get lost a bit, but we had like there was a synth, there was a 12-string guitar in it, and there was a bass. So I had to have those near him and around him in one of those huts actually.
Okay.
Just to keep him off the orchestra, but it sounded great.
It sounds amazing. So the band elements were being straight down to 3-track as well.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, it all went straight.
God.
Yeah.
I love
you
it.
Can
So
tell,
committing.
You can tell I was 24 and I'm thinking, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is wonderful. But you certainly feel like you've done a recording.
Yeah, love it. And then was that to picture as well on the screen, big screen?
Yeah, everything was going. The band were going straight to 3-track on the screen. That was it.
That must have been a buzz.
Oh gosh, it was electric, unbelievable, absolutely fantastic. And but he sort of he went off that idea on a few other pictures after that. He wanted to do everything multi-track.
When he realised he wanted to have more control in the mix.
Yeah, well, that's it. He can't have it all. But yeah, I did a few more scores with him, and we sort of went down the multi-track route. But as he got into the 80s, he was using more keyboards and stuff.
Yeah.
And we actually did, in 1984, both Eric and I were on the same session. We did Supergirl.
Okay, yep.
And
that notorious flop.
Ta-da! We can talk about flops as well. But the way that was recorded, that was quite interesting because he had another brainwave of an idea. This is what I loved about Jerry. He was like trying to sort of break the barrier.
Yeah.
And we ended up recording that initially at Walthamstow Town Hall. So this was 1984. We had an 8-piece orchestra. Eric and I were working at Abbey Road, but we brought all the Abbey Road technical guys over with the mobile, and we had multi-track. We had a 1-inch 8-track playback machine with various overdubs and click track. This was in a location with all headphones, and I was out on the stage behind him with a mixer and a few lexicons and a PA system slung at the back of the orchestra, and there was like 9 or 10 keyboards playing live, sequenced as well with the orchestra, and all the electronic stuff I was mixing live on the PA, and Eric was picking it up on a Decca Tree. This is madness. I mean, and multi-track, and we were all on location, and it was just.
But you got away with it.
Yeah.
And it sounded great.
And we did it here as well. We ended up recording at Tooting Church as well, and in Abbey Road 1 as well.
Wow.
So, yeah.
You mentioned click track, and I don't know whether this is related, but I was wondering if you could tell me actually what this is. So I found this in the old projector room years ago, and it's Anvil Abbey Road Screen Sound Ltd, the company, obviously, and it's got a picture of an anvil on it, obviously. Music Ticker.
Right.
What? I googled Music Ticker and nothing came up.
Okay.
Can you explain what a music ticker is, please?
This was a nickname, actually. It was basically a projected clock.
Ah, okay.
So I don't know how they made it, but this was sort of very much a useful piece of equipment in those days. So when we ran film, we always ran 2 projectors.
Okay.
First projector was with the scene on, and the ticker was the other projector, and as they synchronized together and rolled up,
okay,
this projector overlaid its image on the visual.
Got it.
On the screen.
Yep.
And it was a projected clock basically. So in the corner you had minutes and seconds going all the time, like that, in synchronization, and so that the the composer could see where he was in the score. Some composers didn't want the ticker. I mean, John Williams always worked to a one-handed clock that just kept going round, and he could work it all out by that and everything. Yeah. And other composers wanted the ticker and the clock and every punch mark and wipe going across the screen. So in the old days, when they wanted to cue something in, the music editor would put a Chinograph mark with a long straight edge, either a 3 foot or a 4 foot diagonal. So as it went through the projector, the line went across the screen.
Yeah, like as in get ready, the scene's coming up.
And as it travels, as it hits the right hand side,
Yeah.
boom. And to actually augment that situation, they put punch marks in the film as well. They actually make a hole in the film with a punch mark, like a paper punch. And it would flicker, give them a warning, and bomb. So Jerry actually normally wanted everything going. It was all bells and whistles. But so the music ticker though was the thing that gave everyone the digital clock.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I love how mechanical it all was, like Chinagraphs.
Oh, gosh,
it's just like punching holes in bits of film. I mean,
and sometimes on the session, the composer would say, "I need another cue at bar 4. Can you go up?" And the music editor had to go upstairs, take the film out onto the bench. So we had a bench and everything.
Yeah.
And he had to physically put one in, and then hopefully put it in the right bloody place.
So
and
good.
It was done. That is the first session with Howard Blake with the Sophie Loren.
Because I was just looking at it just then. I was like, "Is that Sophie Loren?" Oh, there we go.
There
we go.
It's not a great picture, but we use that as our superimposed picture on the anvil.
Yeah.
So that's Howard Blake recording the orchestra in Studio One.
Amazing. There we go.
Yeah.
Then. Session number 1 at Abbey Road.
Yeah. So,
Well, for film scoring, that is.
Another
very famous session done during that period, obviously, was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. How was that?
Oh, fabulous. Because everyone was sort of quite famous by now.
That made it more fabulous.
Yeah, and it was just, it'd become, sort of, John Williams had got a sound, that everyone, he'd made this sound work, and it worked for film. And Spielberg, he either worked for George Lucas or Spielberg. And, well, fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they were always very encouraging. And I remember Spielberg came in and he said, I don't want to hark on about the control room, but it was a fantastic line. He came in, he said, "Do you want me to watch the film or hear the music?" he says.
Oh, because the speakers are pointing that way and the film's over there. You can't have both at once. Sorry,
And he laughed. But,
Okay.
But of course, when he heard what was coming out of the speakers, he was just,
Okay. Yeah.
It was. In fact, he sent a driver out to Fortnum & Mason's to get champagne and canapes and stuff, and we all ended up having a bit of a do in there. Actually,
Nice.
But, so that was quite fun. But so that it was the start of that big epic movie stuff, and Raiders was fantastic. It was just it was full on. It was busy music, but really interesting stuff. And
I guess. So John would record, like, if he had a choir in a queue, the choir would be at the same time as the orchestra. So I'm just trying to picture Studio One. You kind of got 35mm projection on the back wall of Raiders of the Lost Ark. You've got a choir on a stage. You've got an orchestra. You've got John Williams, and you've got Steven Spielberg in the control room, and you and Eric just rocking out.
Yeah, just another day at work,
Love it. Absolutely love it. So things wound down, didn't they, for the Anvil Abbey Road partnership? Can you remember what happened, how that happened, or how it wound down, and what you went on to do next?
Okay. Yes, I think. Basically, I think what happened was that with the classical division, obviously were rearing their head again, and obviously they wanted to record, and there's nothing wrong with that. They wanted their studio, and suddenly you couldn't get into Studio One.
Okay,
so they'd book in for 3 weeks, and that would stay. That would be rigid because it was a different regime with the record industry and the classic division. But with the film industry, it all moved around all the time. So, Paul Collette was tearing her hair out because suddenly she'd blocked for us for 2 weeks, and then it became free. So it became quite stressful for all parties, I think, too. Secondly, Eric got very frustrated with... Eric and I felt that we were actually just not being looked after very well.
Okay.
By both sides, by Denham or EMI. We were on an island somewhere.
Yeah.
And we needed financial backing. We were busy. And it was very, we were both talented and we were getting the work in, but you need more than that, to keep it going. And Studio One control room was really getting on our nerves. You know, we things were progressing. People wanted separation booths. You know,
Yep.
people there was more people coming into sessions in the control room, and it just wasn't happening. You know, so yeah, it started to get a bit fragmented, really, and I think that I don't think Anvil Denham particularly. You know, I think it was a bit of a drag for them in the end, having us round their neck.
Yeah.
So I can't remember too clearly, but it just lost interest, really.
Okay.
It got a bit disintegrated.
Yeah.
So what happened was, Eric and I decided to. I think Anvil Abbey Road Screen Sound was folded, and Eric went freelance. So if anyone wanted to come here and record, they'd use him as a freelancer. But then he was free to go anywhere else.
Yes. Yep.
I actually joined EMI for 3 weeks.
Three whole weeks.
No, might have been a month or so.
Okay.
As a sort of engineer. Sorry, keep kissing that mic. As an engineer that was into the film stuff.
Okay, so when you say you joined EMI, you here at Abbey Road.
So I became a sort of staff guy. You know.
Yeah.
But I hated it. I didn't want to do that. So
Okay.
I moved on. I went to CTS at Wembley.
Oh, okay.
Their chief engineer, John Richards, had sort of moved on to
I remember
LA.
John. Yeah.
And they needed another, engineer there. So I went there for a year.
Yep.
And then I went freelance.
Okay.
Totally. So by 1985, both Eric and I were on the freelance game, you know. And I was getting a lot more clients of my own. You know, I was working with Hans Zimmer quite a bit down at Lily Yard in Fulham before he became famous. I was working at, with Richard Harvey, down at Snake Ranch in Fulham and stuff, and doing a lot of stuff like that.
You did the score to Silence of the Lambs, I seem to recall, right?
Yeah, that was in 1990. So as the 80s progressed, I was working in lots of different studios, and I came here a lot doing freelance stuff, quite a lot.
Yep.
And I think it became a happier situation because, we didn't carry the politics anymore.
Yeah.
Also, other freelance engineers came in and did their bit. There was a few American audio engineers in film came over and used Abbey Road, and it was hard for Eric and I really to keep it ourselves. I don't think there was any way we could have. We question it sometimes. Should we have had a patent on it or something? And in those days we weren't thinking that way.
I mean, it sounded like a sort of situation where it was like, we've got an opportunity to save Anvil here. Let's just do whatever we need to do, sort of thing. And,
but it became then it started to change and stuff. And of course, we were on other people's doorstep. We were in another building. We didn't own the building, I mean, and so financially, we didn't have any financial backing.
Yeah.
So we needed to free up and move on.
Yeah.
So I went to CTS, then I went freelancing and came back here on many occasions, did some good sessions and stuff. And towards the end of the 80s, I got the call to go to Munich and other places like that, Munich and Budapest, where there were some cheaper options on orchestras.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And, there was a lot of film scoring going on out there. And in 1990, it was the first time I worked with Howard Shaw.
Yes.
And he did Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. Did you work with him on Naked Lunch
as well?
I did. Yeah, because that before Silence of the Lambs?
No, that was after.
That was after, okay.
So, never met Howard Shaw before, and that was we only spent like a week out there, and we did Silence of the Lambs, and that was an interesting session because he wanted to record it in sets of stereo pairs. So he wanted like all the brass in stereo and the strings high, mid and low in stereo.
Okay.
So the multi-track became just stereo pairs of sections of the orchestra.
Yeah.
And and they were like, if you put it all at zero and pan it left and right, you'd get the sound.
It's like stems, which you do now, right?
I was doing live stems. So,
interesting.
and so there was an element of live mixing there, which he checked and wanted and everything. And that multi-track tape went straight into Sound One in New York, and they dubbed off it.
Dubbed straight off the multi-track.
Which was actually really nice for me because I didn't have to fiddle with it too much. So Silence of the Lambs was done in 1990, and it was done in Munich. And I later went on to record A Kiss Before Dying with Howard Shaw at CTS at Wembley, and later, not long after that, Naked Lunch, which was a big score,
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
different. Another difference.
And,
of the
yeah, I
score.
mean, God, yeah, I mean,
Wacky.
I love those films, you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah. It was,
yeah, his scores are so interesting.
you know. And then he got on to I think he came back here to do all the
Lord of the Rings,
Lord of the Rings
yeah.
with your guy here.
So,
Yeah.
so being in this room is kind of funny for me because I was the assistant engineer for Peter Cobbin, who mixed all the three Lord of the Rings films in this room.
Really?
We spent most of
Wow.
3 years of our lives in this room actually at one point.
Gosh,
It
did
was
you
kind
have
of-
this desk or was it?
No, that would have been back when it was the Neve Capricorn, which
right.
wasn't the most reliable of consoles. So,
Okay, yeah.
that kept things exciting for
Yeah,
us.
I'm
But
sure, yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so am I right? You kind of made a transition into getting involved in kind of dubbing and ADR as well, right? Which I guess is kind of unusual for a scoring engineer, maybe?
Yeah, it was a bit. I mean, I was sort of, I'd got into my 30s and I don't know, there was a lot of American clients weren't coming over to England so much, you know, and I was far too old to be a pop engineer, darling. So, you know.
You weren't going to resort to that, no.
I just thought, well, you know, and Anvil, the old original Anvil, was still doing their audio post-production stuff
Oh, okay.
back at Denham in another block.
Right.
And they sort of needed someone as well. And they needed someone to sort of sort them out a bit as well because they were really living in the dark ages still with equipment. So for a couple of years, I heavily freelanced helping them in dubbing, which is a whole different world, you know. It's certainly not as exciting as music, but you know,
Okay.
it is something, you know, when you hear the whole thing come together, it's fine.
Yeah.
And then they used to ask me to do, you know, sort of Foley work and stuff. And yeah, and, you know, as a freelancer, I had to work. So, you know, so it was like, okay, we're getting, and then I got more involved because I could see technology changing and I got quite excited about, you know, bringing digital work stuff, digital equipment into dubbing. And this was at a time when computers were coming in the late 80s, early 90s. Not just, well, not so much in commercial studios, because they were still operating with the digital linear machines, like the 24-track, the 48-track Sonys and stuff.
Yep.
But audio post-production was really where it was happening with hard disk.
Interesting. Okay.
Very, very quickly, like 85, 86, audiophile came out, very expensive, and only the commercials houses in London and New York could afford them to do jingles or voiceovers or commercials because it was 30 seconds of memory,
Yeah.
you know, and people would pay a lot of money for commercial rates in studios. So that sort of made that equation work.
Yeah.
But you take it outside that and you want like suddenly an hour's worth of memory on 50 tracks on a documentary. These guys couldn't, you know, these things couldn't operate. So it had to sort of be invented quite quickly to keep up with the demand.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was there watching all this happen, and it was like the evolution of
Of where we are now, I suppose.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we all take it for granted.
Yeah.
And so really, you know, Anvil didn't really get into computer audio post until 92, 93.
Okay.
But it was all very exciting. And for a certain time, we had to have computers locked to old equipment as well because they hadn't invented that bit yet, you know.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a nightmare, actually.
It was a nightmare. I mean, it was really a nightmare, you know. But now it's you know, bang, it's on, you know. But it's
Yeah, I mean, I've got a vague idea of how a film is put together these days, especially the sound side. You know, and everything just seamlessly locks together. You know, playback rig, the orchestral rig, the picture is in the orchestral rig or in the playback rig. And it just locks up instantaneously.
yeah.
I can't quite get my brain around how you guys would put films together back in the 70s and 80s.
Well, on a film scoring session, you know, we had like you say okay, and there was like 10-second. There was a 10-second roll up between you know nothing and speed.
Yeah.
And in that 10 seconds, the machines had to sort of lock, the cue light had to go across, and then the downbeat. So it was a really, really precious 10 seconds.
Is it going to work?
Is it going to work?
Okay.
And cue lock was involved in those days.
Yeah. I remember people not speaking too fondly about Q Lock.
Q Luck, I think we called it. But you know, I was thinking about it the other day actually, and there was there wasn't really any other systems around.
Yeah, that was it, sort of
Lynx came in later on.
Okay.
But, you know, it was a very bold piece of equipment for the day and much needed. I mean, if I can just go back to 1980 a minute, there was a really big project I did in Studio 3, 3 months after coming here. Eric was sort of doing big orchestral stuff without me suddenly.
Okay.
And I was in the old Studio 3 where they did the Pink Floyd album and stuff. And it had
Before it had the regen.
Yeah,
So
but-
it was the old version of 3.
and it had the big old Neve desk and everything.
Okay.
And I got involved in a rockumentary called Dance Craze. And
Okay.
I mixed all the tracks live of a load of bands. There was like Selector, Bad Manners, Specials.
Oh, okay. Wow.
The Beat,
Yeah.
Madness. They were all
Yeah.
like in their late teens and just breaking into big venues.
Yeah.
And a guy called Joe Dunton, who invented the Steadicam 35mm film camera,
Oh, yeah.
he got involved as a producer, and Gavrik Losi was a director, and they went out and shot loads and loads of stuff on 35mm. A 7-camera shoot with a 24 track.
In these tiny little venues.
And I spent 3 months putting it all together downstairs.
Wow.
And we ended up with a 6-track mix of it. You know, like as a dub, but it was a sort of a documentary as well.
Yep.
It got shown in Leicester Square, Odeon Leicester Square, and 6-track wasn't invented then.
Okay.
6-track didn't
Yep.
come out until 1985.
Okay.
But we wanted it shown in 6-track. So Dolby put extra speakers in for one-off showing, and we
Amazing.
played it off SEPMAG. We had the 70mm, we had the 35mm blown up to 70,
Yep.
and we played it off a 6-track magnetic head separate.
Wow.
And that
So
was, yeah.
That sounds pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, I'd like to do a magazine thing on that because
Yeah.
no one knows about that.
Yeah,
because
yeah, it's really interesting.
You know, in these days, it would be all over the
Yeah,
magazines,
yeah.
but we used Q-Lock for that a
Okay.
lot because I was using. We transferred all the film to video, and so downstairs I had a 24-track and a 16-track because I was putting stems across. 1980
Yeah.
with a video
Yeah.
going. We had a 310 system and. Yeah.
It sounded like you were happy to sort of push the technical
Well, we
limits.
were. By
Love
even
it.
by today's standards, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
it was sort of interesting.
Yeah.
And I used to dream of sitting here and thinking, yeah, that instrument there would be great if I could have a screen in front of me.
Your dream of Pro Tools.
Yeah, you will go to the ball, Cinderella. And you know, I could press a button, and with a joystick, I could visually see where it is in the 360-degree thing.
Yeah.
And hear it as I'm panning it.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that then.
Yeah.
But of course, you
So
know,
all we have to do is wait 30 years.
yeah. And
That's
wait until
interesting.
you're an old man, you know.
Interesting sounding film. I'll have to check it out. And then, you're composing as well, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you were just telling me before we started this about a really interesting film you just scored about scoring to old film
Yep.
and how the effects used to be done in those
Yeah.
old films.
Yeah, we. So I've always composed, but I mean, you know, during the years of recording, composing never really paid the mortgage. It was,
Yeah, okay.
You know, you did the odd documentary and bits and pieces, and you know, you look back and go, well, I should have gone this way, or we could have done it this way, or whatever. But you know, it's what happens.
Yeah.
But in the last 10 years, I've got out there more and done some short films for people, and I've done 2 or 3 features, which is great, and I have now. With the wonder of electronics and Pro Tools and Ableton and stuff, I do all that at home now. I've got a load of
Yep.
sounds and stuff. But what it's given me is a cinematic ear. So when I compose something or for film, I do it in a filmic way. You know,
Yep.
it's sort of like it's 3-dimensional, and so I can. Years and years of recording other people's stuff has given me a lot of experience, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially Goldsmith, actually. He sort of, you know, he can just play one note sometimes, and it means a lot of stuff. You know?
Yeah.
And of course, you know, you have to hand it as well to Hans Zimmer, for instance. You know, he was a pioneer of early electronic stuff
God, yeah.
in bringing it to the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, the pioneer of just sampling in
Oh.
for films generally. I mean,
Amazing, you know, just
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
He just did it in a completely different way. He did it in his way. And, you know, I'd go into his studio and he'd suddenly have, you know, 10 Akai samplers, you know, when they've only just come out. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And he knew how to how to work them.
Yes,
He was just really clever like that.
Yeah.
And I was reading an article the other night about his studio in 1984, and it went on about Lily Yard at the time, and how they wired it all up and everything. I'm actually got a mention in it, which is quite fun.
Oh, nice.
So it's funny how I got on with Q-Lock and not Fostex. He had a Fostex synchronizer apparently, and I could never get on with that. So
okay.
But going back, but no. So yes, composing thing is great, and I've done not a load of stuff, but it's incredible how all that stuff went into me while I was listening to other people.
Yeah, and it's still there.
It's still there.
And
now
being put into your own compositions.
And I'm not a trained I mean, I have a fairly standard education in music theory, and I used to play an orchestral instrument, and I play guitar, piano stuff now, but not trained. So it's like it comes from, you hear it in your head and you do it. And that's it. And so this new film is basically silent films with a narration, with all music, explaining the film, explaining the situation a bit, and the music really takes it. When the director said, "Can you compose for this film I'm doing?" I said, "Well, how long's the film?" He said, 100 minutes. And I said, well, how much music do you want? He said, 100 minutes. So I said, okay, I can probably get away with repeating the chorus twice.
Okay, yeah.
But actually, him and I got on really well. We have a very good relationship. And I sort of made a start on it. And I said, look, I'll offer you up a few things. And he was really interested in what I was doing. And some of it's really wacky, really, really wacky. It's, So hopefully we'll all get to hear it at some point.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun project.
Pretty good.
Alan, I'm aware we've taken up a lot of your time.
No.
This has been a lot of good fun. Thank you so much for sort of,
My pleasure.
telling us about this really important history of Abbey Road Studios. And before and after, it's...
I mean, there's probably, I'll go back home and think, I should have said this. But I think, I think what it's got across to people is the essence of how it came together, why it came together, and the love and the passion of everyone involved to make it work, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that, and every time I come to Abbey Road here, that it's always a reminder of how it was, although, the people have moved on now. And I have to say, I'm very inspired by you because you are passionate about this stuff.
Well, thank you very much. I mean,
it leads me to, it brings me to sort of talk about it more,
Yeah, I just remember speaking to people like, Alan Rouse,
Dear Alan
when he was around, and and he would just casually mention some of these films he'd worked on over the years. This is going back, when I was young in like the late 90s, and I was just like, my God, you that film was done here, Abbey. It was just like RoboCop was done here, Brazil was done here, Aliens was done here. These were massive influences on me. So I just started to dig a little bit deeper, and then, I mean, it was just like, I think before the first lockdown, I just so happened to be researching this a bit deeper, getting the old, boxes from the archives, and your name certainly came up a lot on the notes and all this sort of stuff. And I just went down this rabbit hole of writing this 4-part kind of blog about the history of film scoring at Abbey Road. So I'm serious. It's an absolute pleasure for you to come here and tell us firsthand.
And of course, the other thing was, I don't know if many people know, but Studio 2 did film scoring as well. We put projection into Studio 2.
Yeah.
And I recorded all the music with Jeffrey Bergen for the Granada TV Brideshead Revisited original show. That was a big moment.
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly some days we had both studios here working on film.
Yeah. I also recently found old session notes from Studio 2 going back to the late 60s. And apparently they did the score, obviously not to picture, but they did the score for Rosemary's Baby in Studio 2. Which I thought was
really?
Cool.
I didn't know that.
But that's another story, and I think we are going to have to end it there. I'll leave it on that cliffhanger, if you like.
We'll end on Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, the end of Rosemary's Baby. Alan, thank you so much. Pleasure.
Thank you so much.